Alright guys, happy Friday. Welcome back. Concepts in Training. Talking about training age today because I think that's one of the things that when we look at long term, how it applies to what we do in training, how we do things, and what really goes into our training program is one of those things that can be muddled a little bit. It can be one of those things that we overstep. And really, especially my background, for some people is I used to train a lot of kids. Right, and a lot of times we see all these different things, training methods, exercises, drills, and a lot of times we need to understand what training age is and how it applies to what we do in training. So when we look at training age is basically how long you've been in a structured training program. Sometimes you can have been working out, and we've talked about working out versus training. You can have worked out for years and still have a very low training age. So when we look at training age, we're looking at time spent in a structured training and really goal-oriented training system and being able to kind of build on skills over time. So when we look at training age, individuals with a very low training age are going to need to spend a lot of time on the basics and really just hone in and focus on very simple movements that are going to build a lot of strength and just competency in the weight room. So, that can be, focusing on major hinging movements, major squatting pattern movements, major pressing movements. When we look at, like I said, my background came from training kids prior to getting back into strength sports. So the way we can level up some of these is basically by focusing on the intent, right? So let's just say you have a 12-year-old who is a new to training, right? Is just the same as a 24-year-old who's new to training, okay? When you have somebody that's new to the weight room, what you're looking at is you're trying to master major patterns and then build on those skills over time. So, that might be a squat, a deadlift, and a bench press, and a pull-up, or even just a simple dumbbell rowing variation. We're trying to build on these skills over time. So when we look at low training age, what we're trying to do is take these simpler movements and start there. As we go through and as we build more competency in those patterns, then we start to layer in more complex movements. So we start to layer in your cleans, your snatches, your front squats, which you could really interchange front squat and back squat. But just for purpose sake, your cleans, your snatches, your jerks, your more complex patterns, being able to kind of build on those skills over time. Because what we really look at when we're trying to build a fully encompassing athlete or just individual who's trying to perform, once we have the basics built, then we can start to build on top of them. All right. Now, some may argue cleans, snatches, jerks, those are basic movements too, and they can be. But when we look at it as an overarching progression across a timeline, those are expressions of more complex movements that we've already done. So then that's how we layer in those bigger things. And then even in the smaller things, the way we start to change things is intent, right? Now, a dumbbell row can be very, very simple. And then we can build on the complexity based on how we focus in on each different component, your breathing, your timing, your tempo, the initiation of different movements. So when we look at training age, one of the things we have to consider is that the newer somebody is to training, whether it's you or somebody you train, the newer you are to training, the easier and the simpler things have to be made. And as we progress over time, those simple things can be made more complex, either by increasing the intensity of the pattern, we can increase the ranges of motion, we can increase the intent. All these different variables factor in over time, okay? So when we look at training age, we have to then start to understand, is what we see on social media, on TV, is it appropriate for somebody with a low training age? A great example is, I always use this as the Antonio Brown example because I got asked several questions by parents when I trained kids of Antonio Brown doing single leg cleans with chains on the end of the bar. Well, what somebody does who has a very high training age, and we can get into how absurd that actual video was. But anyway, when we look at an actual concept of training age, what we see pros doing and people with high training age isn't always what we need people with low training age do, because they've built on those simple, basic components over time. If you've spent 13 years in a structured training environment, well, it's going to be very different what you do at 13 years than what you did in year 2 and year 3. Those things have to compound over time to develop and build skills. So when we look at training age, we need to understand that structured environment is very important. You can have somebody that's been in an unstructured training program and just kind of goes off a whim. Their training age is still going to be kind of low because they haven't built those skills and built the time and those skills over time to be able to then compound and then start to focus on some of the breathing mechanics and then the different intents that we can throw and focuses we can throw on those simple basics. So that's just a brief overview of training age. We could really get into the weeds on some of those things, and we probably will in some later of these concept and training videos. But training age is a little bit different than working out, right? Because we're looking at that structured training, and over time, we're taking that structured training and building on those basics versus via complexity and just changing the intent a little bit. So we'll dive into these topics a little bit more in future videos to really expand on those.